Welcome. My name is Marcos Leon, and I want to tell you about anxiety today. So many of us probably can relate with the experiences in our past in which we have been anxious, we have been aroused emotionally, and we have had encounters with people, close people or people that we didn't know, and we have ended those encounters by saying something that we didn't want to say, or doing something that we didn't want to do. And it is only after the fact, when we calm ourselves, that we can look back and wonder, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? I didn't mean to do that. Those are excellent examples of what anxiety does in our lives. What is important to consider is that sometimes this reactivity, this arousal, emotional arousal that anxiety creates in us, make us sort of react or have reactions that are harsh, and sometimes they can be painful, especially for people who are close to us. A simple definition of anxiety is this: is the intense emotion that we experience when we are faced with a perceived threat. So anxiety is about threats, is about dangers and perception of dangers, like the reaction, the response of our bodies when we perceive something that can harm us. In the brain, it is interesting to see how anxiety works. So we perceive a threat, and we usually do it, our brain registers that because our senses feel that something might be a threat. And immediately, it triggers two different lines of communications. One line is kind of a normal line that is always functioning. It is the line that communicates through our prefrontal cortex. It's a part of our brain where we can have reasoning, where we can analyze, where our thinking actually happens in this prefrontal cortex. And it is in the upper part of the brain. That's a normal reaction. But with anxiety, there is a second additional reaction or trigger that happens. And it is this path of communication that the brain activates to a part of our brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is in the lower part of our brain, in the back, and actually something that we share with other species, with other animals in the world, right? It is a part of our brain that is in charge of survival and protection. So this amygdala has the design, has the potential to activate and create in us responses that are behaviors, things that we say, or things that we do, things that happen in our body that are disconnected of our conscious reasoning prefrontal cortex. So, and this is great. This is a good design. This is the design of God, as I usually say, because in a way it helps us to survive. It helps us to protect ourselves from danger. We don't need to spend more time thinking and analyzing, is this danger too hard, too great? Actually, when the brain perceives a real danger, it activates immediately a response of survival. So, when we think about anxiety, we have to understand that it involves automatic and unconscious processes that are connected with this idea of survival. Anxiety is part of our design. We are designed to survive, again, to protect. So this is where you can talk about the respiratory system and the circulatory system. Imagine that this is your system for protection and survival. And that is good. If I see a car that is coming to me and is going to hit me, I am grateful to have a system in my body embedded, a design that allows me to react immediately in a nanosecond to find protection. This system impacts our physiological, emotional, and cognitive and behavioral processes. So something interesting to understand. Let's say that I'm seeing this car coming. What the brain does without me really thinking about it, when there is a danger and I am facing a danger, actually my digestive system shuts down. There is no need to have energy or to use energy to do digestion, because there is something more important to take care and to face. My heart starts pumping faster. I'm bringing more blood and more oxygen, especially to my limbs, to my arms and to my legs, making me a little bit stronger so I can face this danger. My eyes get more clear, and I get into this state of adrenaline, if you want. A lot of chemicals are created in my body that allow me to survive. And again, that is automatic, it's reactivity. It doesn't involve my thinking, the thinking part of my brain. Several things happen. And because of this unlinking with my prefrontal cortex, in a way, I can say that anxiety sort of reduces, in some extent, my ability to reason. I'm not really thinking. The way that I say it usually is we can have an intense emotional moment. We can experience emotional intensity, and we will have a very low or a lower capacity to reason, to think, right? Or vice versa. When I have a high capacity to think and to reason, usually my emotions are going to be at bay, are going to be kind of in a state of calmness, right? It's really hard to do this. It's really hard to have emotions and thinking in a very high level at the same time. You need a lot of training. Think of Marines and soldiers that are constantly trained, that in moments of anxiety and war and explosions have enough brain, if you want, to follow the leader. That's training for Marines. Many of us are not. So there are two types of anxiety, and it's important to distinguish them. The first kind of anxiety is the example that I've been putting until now. The example of a car coming to me, a dog coming to bite me, a car going in the street, and a kid crossing without seeing the car. Acute anxiety is related to a threat that is real. You actually see the car coming. The dog is actually here. And it is also characterized by an intense reaction. All these systems go right up and activate all these things going on in your body. So that's one kind of anxiety. The second kind of anxiety is what we know as chronic anxiety. Chronic anxiety is different than acute because in this case, the threat is not necessarily real. It's a perceived threat. It's the possibility of a threat. And therefore, the threat is not there. I'm not seeing the car. The reaction, the reactivity, the emotional, the chemicals in my brain is real. It happens too, but it happens in a lower intensity. A good example of that is thinking of Houston. And in the last 3 years, we have had several times in which several families have flooded, a lot of flooding, big rain. So especially if you have been in that experience, what happens is there is some level of chronic anxiety, especially for those who flooded, right? It starts raining pretty hard, and immediately something gets activated. What if this time it rains as hard as before? What if I flood again? What if I have to go through all that loss and that trauma again? So you see, that is an element in which chronic anxiety raises. It is not sure that it will rain. There's a possibility. My brain believes that it can be, and the impact on the body is pretty clear. It is important to say too that even though we are designed for survival, to react and to save ourselves from the car coming, or the kid from the car running over the kid, we are not really designed to be in a state of chronic anxiety for long periods of time. There's a lot of consequences of chronic anxiety. First, we don't have that capacity of thinking all the time. It reduces. If this is constant, it is a real problem. And then physiologically, our bodies are not designed, our organs are not designed to be in that state of adrenaline, even if it is mild for long periods of time. Eventually, those organs suffer, and anxiety becomes a chronic problem, a mental health problem, and even a physiological problem. Gastritis and ulcers are, for example, connected with high levels of anxiety. So it's important to understand too that anxiety is contagious and is cumulative. And when I say it's contagious, have you ever been in a room full of people and there's a speaker, somebody is addressing the crowd and is anxious? And you can see him or her sweating, and you can see how anxiety is evident there. And suddenly you start feeling the same thing. So that is an excellent example of how anxiety is contagious, right? we perceive anxiety. Our senses perceive anxiety like this force that is taking place, and they activate anxiety in us. Emotional systems are made of people that are connected emotionally, and anxiety is a big part of it. So it is contagious. And this happens in families. When mom is anxious about something, everybody feels it, especially children that are there. They are observing. They see that something changes. It doesn't need to be said, or you don't need to use the word anxiety to understand it. Even babies feel when anxiety is present, because we have this ability to read uh, the emotional state, if you want, of the people that we are with. And anxiety is cumulative. So it becomes a burden that adds. So let's say that I have a conversation today, and there is a conversation on Monday that I have to take because I might lose my job. So you see, the threat is a possibility. It's not real. I have to wait until Monday, but from now to Monday, I'm carrying this, let's say, between 1 and 10, this level of 4. This burden of a number 4, anxiety. I'm carrying that, and I know that it might not be a case, but here I am. My confusion increases, or my reasoning decreases, my anxiety, my emotions increases. And let's say that in the middle of that, or before Monday, I receive a phone call and they tell me that my dad is sick and is serious. Another level of anxiety, 2 or 3, add to my burden. And now I'm not carrying a burden of 4, but I'm carrying a burden of 7 or 8. So I'm carrying this, and I'm not carrying anything, but I'm carrying everything. And then I go home, and when I get home, I kick the dog. I'm harsh with my kids or with my wife, and you see what I'm overreacting. What's going on? They don't have anything to do with what's going on to me. It is because I'm carrying a burden of anxiety that has accumulated. And it's important to think that, especially because we all want to love well our families, and sometimes we don't know why we ended not doing and not being the people that we want to be with them. So Roberta Gilbert is a psychologist, and she gives a very good she gives us clarity about this connection between anxiety and our capacity of thinking, of reasoning. She writes, after anxiety reaches a certain level, which is different for each person, it overpowers thoughtful response. Logic is unavailable. Without the ability to be logical or give a thoughtful response, a relationship snag cannot be resolved. So the anxiety continues to escalate. So that is the problem, and that is sometimes the curse and the slavery of anxiety, especially when it's chronic in families. We see that more and more as it is increasing, it's not addressed. The roots of what are causing anxiety are not addressed. What happens is we have less capacity to solve problems that we will solve more easily. It will become. So it is a big deal. And anxiety also is influenced by our past experiences. Once again, Roberta Gilbert gives a great example. She writes, emotions often are patterns that became established early in one's personal history. And these patterns may or may not be relevant to the present. For example, a person who was reared by a father who beat him or her after raising his voice might be triggered into extremely intense life and death emotions whenever he or she is around people who raise their voices. Although this reaction is inappropriate to adult life when no abuse or threat is present, the pattern became part of the emotional repertoire of the nervous system early on. So I think it's a great example. Abuse and loud voices, they were connected in the past experiences, usually in our childhood, the ways that we were raised. And then we will become adults, and these loud voices have the potential to trigger the anxious response in us, even if the loud voices are not about us. They don't represent a threat for us because we're adults and nobody's trying to abuse us in this case. we cannot stop this emotional triggering that loud voices cause in us. And this is important to understand. So how anxiety uh, was formed in a way in our past experiences, how my family dealt with anxiety and anxious situations. All that helps us to be able to see and understand how anxiety takes place in us, and especially to perceive if threats are real or threats are only perceived. The loud voice is a threat that is perceived. It's not a real threat, but the anxiety gets into it, and the anxiety becomes a problem when it takes command, let's say, when it is in control, is driving the bus. So the work of anxiety requires that we understand our unconscious threats. And we have unconscious threats because we have unconscious needs. Beyond the needs of shelter and food and oxygen, we have needs that are more invisible, right? And we all have them. The need for security and survival. There is a need to feel that we are safe. The need of affection and esteem, the need to be loved, and the need for power and control. It is the need to understand that I can be responsible for my own life. I can actually be in control of things that happen in my own life. Those all are needs that we all share, and they operate in a level of unconscious. And usually they are also very connected with past experiences. But those are real needs that we have. We were designed to have those needs. And obviously, if those needs were met or not met, we learn to fear. That's where the threat comes, right? We fear. For example, we fear being hurt or losing identity. We are not safe, losing our security, right? Or we fear being abandoned. We fear being rejected, not loved. That triggers this anxiety too. Or we fear being dominated, when somebody takes control and takes away our capacity to take control of our own lives. All those are fears, become threats, and somehow our brain and our relationships, we are constantly scanning for possible threats. This is part of our design. Being able to see those threats is helpful because we can actually get to the root of the problem. So this work of anxiety has, I will say, two objectives and two tools for it. The first objective is in the moment, anxiety in the moment. So how do I handle the moment of anxiety, myself in situations of anxiety, when it is triggered, right? When it's happening right now, when somebody says something that triggers all of this, how can I learn to handle myself? I cannot control the other person. I cannot eliminate anxiety. The only thing that I can do is sort of learn to control myself in that situation. And that's one of our objectives. How do we learn to do that? A second objective is how can we create a lifestyle in which we are more free from anxiety? It's a lifestyle that actually helps us to sort of flex the muscles of peace inside of us. So we are more prone to peace and calmer than other people are. So those are the goals, and there are two tools that we use for this in this work, the work of anxiety. The first tool is connected with the first goal, awareness. Awareness, this capacity to increasingly be more aware of myself and what's going on, or seeing myself in the moment. So how anxiety starts in me. How can I be aware of the anxiety being activated in me? Usually when we think about anxiety, is 9 seconds after our body have started to perceive anxiety. So the sweating of my palms or the tension of my neck are bodily, physiological reactions that are in which my body are telling me that anxiety is here. So awareness about where do I feel the anxiety in my body is the first step. Awareness of how do I respond to anxiety. It is very predictable, the different patterns that we do. I'm doing this, I'm raising my voice, I'm going away, I'm stepping back. All those things allow me to see myself and to see that anxiety is happening to me. So awareness is a big word, and there is actually the work that we need to start doing. I say often, we cannot take off anything that we cannot see. I cannot take off a jacket that I cannot see that I'm wearing. So I need to learn to be aware of anxiety in me so I can manage myself in those moments. So that's the first tool. And the second tool is what we call spiritual practices. It's a lifestyle. It's like a workout, like when people work out and train, do some kind of training. So we need sort of a training, a spiritual workout of practices that helps us to be calmer. From prayer to meditation, mindfulness, silence, taking a walk, exercising. There are a lot of practices that can help us to foster, cultivate a life that is freer from anxiety. So those are the tools, those are the goals in the work of anxiety. I like now to offer a short reflection, spiritual reflection about anxiety. So I I borrow from Apostle Paul in the letter to the Philippians. In chapter 4, he writes the following: Don't worry about anything. Another translation says, Be anxious about nothing. Right? Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him from all He has done. Then you experience God's peace. You will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Those are beautiful words that sort of give us the alternative. In the moment of anxiety, I believe, when I'm seeing that anxiety is coming, worry is coming, but Paul is inviting us to, instead of dwelling into that anxiety and keep our minds and our hearts into that anxiety, he says, instead of that, pray. Pray about it. Pray about everything. And tell God honestly what you think. And be grateful. Consider there are positive things in your life too. And the promise is you will experience God's peace. And this peace of God is not a peace that depends on the circumstances. It's not external. It's not a peace that is only present when we fix the problem. It is actually a peace that comes from the inside, comes from God inside of us, and is a peace that surpasses all understanding. So this is what really takes care and keeps our hearts, emotions, and our minds in Christ Jesus. So this is a beautiful reflection, a beautiful alternative that Paul is inviting us to consider as we face anxiety in the moment. He continues and he says, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true, and honorable, and right, and pure, and lovely, and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learn and receive from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. Again, beautiful words. I think this is a second alternative. It's an alternative for that lifestyle of anxiety. And what Paul is telling us is, instead of dwelling in bad news, instead of dwelling in what is wrong and what is lacking and on the possible dangers and threats in your life, choose to think about, put your mind in different things, think about different things. He says, fix your thoughts in what is truth and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable, things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Think of the positive. Think of the positive. Choose to dwell in all the good things that God has done, that you can see in your own life, and you will see how your heart follows in that way, where you're putting your mind. The promise, again, is that the God of peace will be with you. And the God of peace will be with you when you are at peace, and the God of peace will be with you when you are anxious. And that is the way in which we foster a lifestyle that is different than an anxious culture in which we live. So, as practice, I would like to encourage you to do the following. If you want, you want to learn, you have to practice. Learning happens as we practice. Practice is what brings transformation. So, I suggest the following. First, prepare. For your practice, prepare. Set aside 30 minutes. 30 minutes without a phone, 30 minutes to meditate and pray in the presence of God. And start by taking 2 or 3 deep breaths that will somehow align your heart and your mind with God. And people who study and do research in breathing, they say that for breathing that aligns you, bring these calming things and aligns your body and your mind and your heart, you need to breathe slowly. Inhale slowly and deeply for 4 seconds. And then you need to hold the air for another 4 seconds. And eventually you need to breathe out slowly for another 4 seconds or more. So 4 seconds, 4 seconds, and 4 seconds at least. Do that 2 or 3 times, and you will feel the calming practice of breathing. You will remember that you're breathing, and you're breathing all the time, but sometimes we forget. So that is a great preparation. Breathe and be silent for 2 or 3 minutes. Allow your mind to settle. You probably will find that your mind is all over the place. Actually, that's what you need, silence. You need to calm down a little bit, 2 or 3 minutes. After you prepare, reflect. Think of an episode, an occasion when you had anxiety, you experienced anxiety, and think of these questions. What happened? What really happened? Now that you are calm, how do you see what happened? Not the interpretation of what happened, not what you thought that people were saying, what really happened. What were the facts that you experienced in your experience? And then how did you react? Where did you feel the anxiety in your body? And what reaction, what behavior you saw in yourself? How did you talk back? Or what did you do in reaction to that anxiety that was triggered? And then what was the impact of that reaction? How did it work? Was it helpful or not? Was it loving or not? Did it hurt others or yourself? And then consider, how would you have reacted if you would have been without anxiety? Would you have been able to do, or would you like have to do something different than you did? Finally, consider what God tells you about the experience. And especially consider this not in the light of judgment or God judging you and telling you that you did wrong or something. That's not helpful. Actually, think of what God says in the context of love. Love is not a mistake. In the context of learning, we all need to learn what God says. This is the idea of the practice, to learn to be better in an anxious moment. So reflect that, and after you reflect that, give yourself time to present that reflection to God and ask Him to help you see and overcome the anxiety that you felt and the anxiety that you constantly feel. Present to God your requests, everything. Maybe the specific, or maybe you get present to other kinds of threats that you are constantly dealing and carrying you. Present to God with your request with humility and with honesty. Pray. And finally, share. Share what you're learning with somebody else, somebody that you love, somebody that you trust. Sharing produces or increases clarity in our learning, and somehow it makes our learning substantial, integrates learning in our lives. And there's indeed a lot of clarity. So talk with your spouse or with somebody that you love and say, this is what I'm learning about me. This is not about just having an opinion. It is just you sharing what you are learning.